From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
Good morning. I'm Stephanie Marcus from the Science, Technology, and Business Division here at the library, and I'd like to welcome you to today's presentation, The Chesapeake Bay from Space, New Views of a National Treasure. And you should be glad we didn't hold this outdoors because we're having summer bay weather out there, so you can cool off for a while. Of course, the bay is also our local treasure, and really, this is very, very relevant to us as citizens of the bay. I, for one, find it so exhilarating to drive across the Bay Bridge and look out across the glistening waters. Of course, my husband is saying, "Keep your eyes on the road." This program is the fourth in a series in 2010 presented through a partnership between NASA Goddard Space Flight Center and our division. This is also the fourth year of our very successful partnership. Our speaker today, he says, just call him Eric, Dr. Eric Brown de Colstoun, has been at Goddard since 1999 and is currently the coordinator of Earth Sciences Education and Public Outreach in the Earth Sciences Division. He has both a master's and doctorate in geography with an emphasis in remote sensing and biogeography from the University of Maryland at College Park. So a local guy, but he came there by way of Venezuela, et cetera, so he has a curious accent. And probably if no, I didn't mean that in a bad way. It's interesting. I couldn't figure out what it was. But if you want to learn more about him, you might try to friend him on Facebook. We saw that he has a page. Yeah, we discovered it. So you can add a room full of fans today. Today we will learn about the use of Landsat satellite images and data from other sources to document the changing land use across the Chesapeake Bay watershed and how this data helps identify and target areas for conservation, restoration, and growth. Without further ado, please join me in welcoming Eric.
Thank you for a nice introduction, and thanks for inviting me here to speak. You know, I was trying to come up with a title for this presentation. I thought, well, new views, but actually when you look at this, you actually have old views as well. And so, you know, at NASA, we have a lot, archive of satellite data so we can go back in time and look at things, how things are changing and how things are changing, towards the future. And by the way, my accent is not from the Eastern Shore either, so maybe just to keep that in mind. And yeah, so I'm actually a geographer in training. I'm a physical scientist, but I'm also a coordinator of Earth Science Education. So one of the things that we do like to do, we're trying to do more and more with the Chesapeake Bay, and the research that we're doing is to involve local schools, local students, local citizen scientists in helping us verify the accuracy of the map. So that's also something that, I guess, if you want to call it, fires me up inside, is when, you get to interact with the public. And so I'm going to give you sort of a little bit of a fly-through, if you will, some of the things that we are doing at NASA in terms of the Chesapeake Bay and how we're monitoring and hoping to do things in the future. So I was rereading this book recently, Chesapeake Bay Blues by Howard Ernst, and one of the things that struck me is how rich the Chesapeake Bay ecosystem was in the past. It's been occupied for hundreds of years, and so I don't think any of us need to be convinced of what it once was. There seems to be some hope for the future that things are slowly getting better, but I think it's good to put that in a context that, people have been here for hundreds of years and have been modifying the land for that amount of time. So things that we see today have a long history. The other part that sort of, and Dana here was in the crowd asking me whether this talk was related somehow to the executive order that was recently signed, and in part it is. This is the executive order that was signed recently, I guess in May. And one of the things that, why I show this is that I guess I work at NASA, and when I looked at all the logos, I didn't see a NASA logo. And I think that doesn't mean that we need to be involved in everything, but I think, from the scientists that we have, the data tools that we have, the systems that we have, I think we can certainly be a lot more effective partner in the management of the Bay. So sort of that's where I'm coming from, is to try to, use NASA's resources and tools to move ourselves forward and help out in a more effective way. And the other part is we had a workshop at NASA Goddard Space Flight Center on the Chesapeake Bay, and we actually identified 13 different projects at Goddard that are doing something on the Bay. So obviously we're doing a lot, but maybe not, have the critical mass to make a big impact. That's kind of the background, if you will. So just to give you an idea, I'm a physical scientist, so I study actually land cover and land use from space. And so many people, maybe some of you here might have not known that NASA studies Earth. I mean, we know we have the astronauts, we have the planets, Hubble, but you might not know NASA studies Earth. Well, we do. So the research that I do and that other people, is driven by very broad science questions. So things like what I am studying is, for example, so how are global ecosystems changing? Okay, very broad question. So I think I'm supposed to stand here, I can't move. So I like to move around and I can't move. So anyway, bear with me. So what we're using is we're using remote sensing data. I don't see my, oh, there it is, okay. So what changes are occurring in global land cover and land use, and what are their causes? So there we recognize that who's the cause of the land cover change? It's us, okay? So humans are an active component of what's going on with the changing planet, okay? There's a lot of natural changes, but we're recognizing the impact of, social and human dimensions of climate change. So the next one is, so how's the Earth's surface being transformed, and how is the information used to predict future changes? So this is the whole prediction part. So we take past data, or we look at how things have changed in the past to help us predict how things are going to be in the future. So for climate change, we have giant computer models that actually simulate climate change. For the Chesapeake Bay, a lot of the land cover data that we have can go into hydrological models to see, to urban growth models to see what things are going to look like in the future. So there's that component of prediction. And then the last one is, so what are the consequences of the change for us, for productivity, and for ecosystems? Okay, so that's kind of the so what part of the talk, or the so what part of NASA's research is, what is the impact of the changes we observe? Okay, so that's kind of really very from top down why we even look at Earth and things like the Chesapeake Bay. So from my personal perspective, again, I was born in Brazil, in Sao Paulo, and I grew up in Venezuela, and I have, my mom is from North Dakota, and my dad is French, that's over here, and my sister was born in Morocco. So we have like a kind of a UN. And one of the things that I like about remote sensing is that, not only do you get to see the systems of the Earth when you look at, you see the clouds, the land, and the oceans together, is that at least I feel like I belong somewhere. I don't have a hometown, but, and so that's what attracts me to remote sensing. And the other part as well is then sort of that connectivity that you have from this global perspective to the place where we all live and go to work. And So with the NASA satellite data, we can, we have data at multiple scales. So, and this is kind of a poor man's zoom. I have a couple examples that are much better than this, but this is my version. So this is a Landsat satellite mosaic of the United States. So we just keep zooming in. And don't worry about what LEADAPS is. It's just it's a colleague, Jeff Masek, has a project called Landsat Ecosystem Disturbance Analysis Processing System. So this is the boundaries of the Chesapeake Bay for the 2000 time period. So the same as you would see it from space, pretty much. So this is what actually one Landsat image looks like. So this is for 2008. And so, I was going to put people on the spot and have you come up and identify things, but I think we'll just move on. But so hopefully, and I don't see my cursor again. There it is. Okay. So here's Washington, D.C. here. Here's the Chesapeake. Here's Baltimore. Okay. The Potomac coming in. And so, these, I'm sure that you've been on Google on maps, and so right up here is Greenbelt Park. Goddard Space Flight Center is right here. There's the mall. You can actually, no, I don't think you can, you see sort of the shadow of the Washington Monument. And this image now is actually from commercial satellite. It's the stuff that you see on maps, on Google Maps. It's not a NASA source, but here you can actually see individual trees and cars, and so. Anybody want to guess where we are? I actually had it wrong when I first came. I'm glad somebody pointed it out. But so, and so if you're not here, then you're somewhere else. So, just and so what the important thing to communicate here is that the place where you are, is connected to that watershed, is connected to the continent, is connected to the globe. And so really the idea is that things that you do locally have an impact, at a coarser scale, and vice versa, things that are going on at the climates at the global scale have an impact on us here. So many times, you flush, many people don't think when you flush your toilet, well, it ends up in the Chesapeake Bay, okay? So that whole connectivity is something that I really like about remote sensing, and that's why it's the kind of stuff that I like to do. So I think here I was going to show a nicer version of this. And so this is, if you're interested, there's a science visualization studio at NASA Goddard where they have movies and they have a lot of the material that I'm showing you today, and you can actually go in and download the data and play it for your friends, or on your computer, on your iPod, whatever. So let's see if this is going to work. Okay. So this is now a zoom in, much better than I could have done it myself. And I was telling, I wish I had some narration, so I can't do a David Attenborough, but so here's the dismal swamp. And as we fly through, so anyway, maybe you can narrate in your head. And one of the things that I thought is nice here is when you think of land cover, it's the types of forests, water bodies, cropland, cities. That's what we mean by land cover. And so we have these data over time, and then we can start studying how things are changing over time. And so you'll see quite a bit of forest in this area. Okay, I think it was supposed to be, yeah, so we're moving up. So that's Annapolis here on the left, Chesapeake Bay. I thought I had it's supposed to And so that's a man-made island right here outside of Baltimore, the inner harbor. And right up here is the Susquehanna. There's supposed to be labels coming up, I guess. I had maybe the wrong movie. But so this is the Susquehanna. And then, so the Susquehanna Basin is the biggest basin draining into the bay. And what people might not know is actually the Chesapeake Bay is the sort of the remnant valley of the Susquehanna. And so through sea level rise, the bay has been flooding back in, I guess, if you will. And if you notice, from eastern shore to western shore, the land use is very different. There's a lot of croplands, a lot of fragmentation of the forests on the eastern shore. We're coming towards Cambridge right down here. And now we're coming to the Blackwater National Refuge, a lot of the wetlands. And then we're going to be flying out towards Chincoteague. Chincoteague is not draining into the bay. But anyway, this is a nice view of the kind of satellite data that we have. And so we have this over time. And so we can do analysis of how things are changing. And the other part that I just wanted to mention is the interest of NASA is we have 2 NASA centers on the Chesapeake Bay watershed. So we have Goddard Space Flight Center in Greenbelt. We have NASA Langley Atmospheric Research Center in Virginia. NASA headquarters is also here in downtown. So that's another interest as well. There's a lot of resources. And so you can go and get this image if you'd like. I thought this is it kind of gives the same idea again, that the connectivity across spatial scales. So I think we go back to the globe. There we go. Okay. So I don't know if anybody has any questions so far, but if not, I'm just gonna move on. I think, let's see if I can. So what I'm gonna show you a little bit is various projects that are going on the bay. So we have a couple interns here that are working with me on a couple projects. One is to map winter cover crops, crops that are going in winter that use up a lot of the excess nitrogen left in the fields. But we're also trying to develop some maps of urbanization, 2010 map. So I'm not going to go through all of these, but I'll just show you some examples. So if you're interested in what's going on with the bay, first of all, so these are colleagues at the University of Maryland Center for Environmental Studies, and they produced this Chesapeake Bay scorecard. And if you look at the grades, if you're a C student, you're pretty average, I think. But there's actually some hope in that the overall base score was a C- last year, and so it's gone up to C this year, or I guess in 2009. And it looks like, because of the Susquehanna River has a low river flow this year, that things seem to be improving. There's an uptick in improvement. So there's some cautious optimism that things might be getting better. Now, what you see is there's certain areas that are getting better and others that are not. And so that's where the remote sensing data can come in, is you can start studying different watersheds and see what's going on there. Perhaps, we have atmospheric data sets as well. And so there's a lot of pollution and nitrogen deposition coming in from the air that may have a big impact into these changes that we're observing here. So if you're interested in this, please go to that website. And so, just to give you a little back perspective, so basically the Chesapeake Bay now there's a lot of sea level rise, and so these are some of the changes that I'll show you. So you can see that, I think you've probably heard about quite a few of these. And if you thought last year was a big winter, Well, there was actually time when there might have been ice on the Chesapeake Bay, so the late 70s as well. So it wasn't that bad. This is another example. These are these islands, the Poplar Island and Coaches Island. I don't know if I'm talking into the right, moving. So in 1987 from Landsat. So this is this little inset here. So this is what the islands looked like in '87, and that's what they look like now. And they're actually, so sea level rise is and the same thing is happening at Blackwater National Refuge, or a wildlife refuge. So this is Blackwater Wildlife Refuge, and so the Fish and Wildlife Service manages this, and so they've they've measured that there's significant marsh loss due to sea level rise. So these on the left panel here are sort of our predictions. This is sort of historical data for marsh loss. And so this is the satellite image. It's a small subset. So this is the Blackwater Refuge right here. So in 1985, so the black areas are the bluish black areas are the water. So you see a lot of the change as well on the land occurring from 85 to 97 to 03. And then the last one is 09. And so if you look at these areas, for example, in the 85 and then in the 09, what you see is there's a lot of ponding, a lot of increase, water penetration in these areas as well. You see a lot more. And so this is a really good example. I mean, I think in many ways when we talk about climate change to people, it's and even myself, I have, since it doesn't feel like the house is necessarily on fire, it's not something that impacts you necessarily directly that day or is impacting you now. I think it's difficult to really get, empowered by it. And I think this is a really good example, okay, of something. People who go fishing there, go hunting there, is something that in their lifetime they can see a change occurring because of climate change. So I think this is a really good example of climate change impacting places that we care about, okay? So a lot of the work that has been done was done by the University of Maryland Regional in the Chesapeake Bay, is a University of Maryland Regional Science and Application Center that was actually funded by NASA. And one of the main things that they did, I don't think this shows up very nicely on the, but one of the main things we can do with the remote sensing data is to make a land cover map or land use map. So this is the most basic data that we can generate. So it's basically categories of different land cover types. And these data are taken directly into the models of the Chesapeake Bay. Okay, so models of hydrological, water flow, and so on. The problem with this is that the data are done every 5 years or very irregularly. So, when changes are occurring rapidly, we're not capturing that. So this is what we're trying to do now, and what I'm talking about today is to try to see how can we be more effective at monitoring the bay on a yearly or at least biannual basis. And I will just say as well that the USGS has recently produced a time series of land cover that comes to 2006. So Peter Claggett at the Chesapeake Bay program, they have done that as well. So, and no matter how we cut it, this is the most basic data that we are actually using for modeling. Well, the Chesapeake Bay program. So the idea is this lead-up system, and again, I just show this, for reference if you're interested in it. But the Landsat system has been around since the 70s, okay? But the data have always been available for some charge, okay? Even I, working with the Landsat project office, I had to pay $500 a scene to the USGS, And so that's always been a limiting factor in being able to do anything on a large scale and, you know, very densely over time, since there was a significant cost associated with it. So this program here is actually used, you know, put together a continental mosaic of North America of Landsat data over time to look at forest disturbance. And so if these guys can do it, we should be able to do it for the Chesapeake Bay. So this is what it looks like, okay? It doesn't necessarily look pretty because you have clouds, you have snow, you have certain issues, but each Landsat scene is about 8,000 by 7,000, we call them pixels, like your digital camera. So that's about 56 million pixels per scene. And so to make this mosaic, it takes 1,000 scenes. So that's a lot of data, okay? I know it's hard to comprehend, but we've never really been able to do this kind of stuff until now because the data are free. So now we have a continental scale forest disturbance map. We can compare 1990 to 2000 and see, you know, what are the areas over the US. And so all of this goes into, you know, issues with the carbon cycle, okay, national level management issues of forest as well. So what, you know, in LeadUps is a whole processing system. I'll just show you a couple examples. This is for Central America. And one of the things we have to do is we have to essentially remove the effects of the atmosphere, okay? When you have a hazy day and you have a clear day, if you compared those two dates, you may introduce an error just because of the atmosphere. So we have to essentially remove that. And so what LeadUps does, this is before, so you see a lot of the haze. And I like this example. I mean, it's not Chesapeake Bay, but just because it's very, I mean, you still see a lot of the clouds. I mean, there's areas in the world where, unfortunately, we haven't figured out how to remove the clouds. So, and, you know, particularly down here, the Darien Peninsula is very, very cloudy. So this is what a LeadUps mosaic would look for the Chesapeake Bay. So this is actually 22 Landsat scenes, again, for the Chesapeake Bay watershed. And so people, you know, actually people might not know that it extends all the way into New York State, that far north. So it's a pretty large area, about 64,000 square miles or acres. And so the next thing about this is we can start looking at seasonal changes. So this is now a zoom in leaf-off conditions. So the deciduous trees have lost their leaves. And so even within one season, we can have multiple data sets to look at seasonal change. So again, this is something we haven't really been able to do before. So that's where we're moving. Obviously, if you look at land cover, how things change over time, you know, a coniferous forest is going to be green throughout the year. A deciduous tree is going to have, you know, green leaves during the summer and is going to be leaf off. So we use these patterns to look at the landscape and crops. So one of the things that we're doing, I talked about this winter cover crops project, and there's a couple of the students here. And so what we're working on is to create the first winter cover crop mosaic of the Chesapeake Bay. Okay. Now, winter cover crops is one of the best effective management tools. What you know, the state of Maryland has a program where they pay farmers if you grow something in the winter or after you've harvested your main cash crop, it's going to use up a lot of that leftover nutrients in the land, and then, you know, so that's one of the better management practices to reduce some of the nutrient flows into the bay. So what we're looking for is to look for things that are green in winter and that are crops, okay, so that we can help the state of Maryland assess whether they've done a good job. You know, they right now don't really know if the money that they're giving out is going to the right people. So this is what an example of that. So I keep reaching for my pointer, but I need to go over here. Sorry. So this is Cambridge, Maryland. So in the green here, you have things that are green in winter. So that's likely a conifer. Okay, or you have sometimes people's lawns or golf courses. Okay, and so we have on this side we have essentially the greenness of that. Okay, so you see the urban areas are dark. Okay, areas that are very green are bright, and the little yellow polygons are cropland data sets that we have from USDA. So what we're trying to do is to create a map. I know this is a little bit hard to see, but essentially the map is telling us that there is something green in winter and that it's been a crop in the past. So this is our sort of preliminary, preliminary product for the winter cover crop. So we're trying to develop some products for this area and then extend it to the whole watershed. I don't know if there's any questions on that. Entirely super clear. Okay. The other thing the other aspect of what I'm doing is studying global urban growth. So, this is an example of what we can do with satellites. So this is Riyadh in Saudi Arabia. And so these little red areas are just vegetation along a drainage. So if you see in 1972, 1990, 2000. So since these data are all co-registered, we can actually measure a quantitative measure of the growth. And so that's what we're doing. I'm going to, Okay. And so you're saying, well, why do we want to measure urbanization? I'll just show a quick, I keep losing my cursor. But why would we want to look at urbanization? Well, urbanization basically, I mean, you've heard about the heat island effect in the sense that, buildings radiate a lot of heat, parking lots, so typically urban centers are a lot hotter than the environment, than the surrounding environment. And actually it turns out as well that, in deserts, urban areas are actually cooler than the surrounding environment. So there's some very interesting research questions there for a future warmer planet, for example. But it really, what urban areas do, and impervious cover really does, is to mess up or to modify the hydrological cycle. So if you look at the purple line here, that's what the stream flow looks like after an event. So there's a rainfall event on the left, and then eventually the water gets down. Keep losing this thing. So eventually the water gets down to the river. Now in an urbanized setting, what happens is there's a much shorter period between the time when the water falls on the ground and when you have some kind of flooding event. But also what it does is it increases the amount of water getting into the river. So I did some work in the Delaware River Basin, and it turns out that a lot of the flooding that they experienced was because there was a lot of impervious cover upstream. So again, the idea that things upstream impact things downstream. So I'm going to skip through this because this is more of a technical, I don't know whether we want to, but the way that we map impervious cover at the scale of Landsat, which is 30 meters by 30 meters. We have very high resolution data like air photography or the image that I showed you, the Iconos. So this is about 1 meter data. So we interpret it into a mass that's essentially the white areas are impervious, the black areas are non-impervious. And then we essentially just count, we count how many little 1 meter pixels are impervious in that 30 meter pixel. And so that's how we create, it's called training data. And so we have data like that all over the Chesapeake Bay, and then we basically project the results to the entire watershed. I know it's a little bit, a little bit technical, but that's basically the way that we do it. Okay, and I'm gonna, this is an example in Delaware. I think I'm gonna, well, I can show you. So this is the Pocono International Speedway. And so you can actually see how things have changed. You can actually see the impervious cover, the actual track, and you can see how things have changed. They've added some parking lots and a new grandstand. And here, these areas are these big Army depots that come in. So, when you put this thing together, you can see where things are growing. I'm gonna skip ahead a couple slides, but just to let you know that the University of Maryland, so they did this for the 2000 time period. So here you have, the red areas are very high impervious cover, low areas in black. So this is for the entire watershed. So this is now the Washington, D.C. area, and you can actually see, so down here, where's my cursor? There it is. So this area down here is Andrews Air Force Base, so you can actually see the runways, National Airport, the mall. This is Rock Creek Park, right here, Potomac running through, Greenbelt Park, Goddard Space Flight Center. So we have these data sets over time, and one of the things that another project that we're working on with the interns is to produce a 2010 version of this, and so that we can come up to the present, essentially. So this is the Dulles corridor, so you can actually start seeing where the growth is going over time. This is another example. This is now using some of the data from the 70s, but we really have an archive dating back almost 40 years. So we can only, oops, I think I went backwards, sorry. And there's a future mission called Landsat Data Continuity Mission, or Landsat 8, which is going to continue that record over time. So we are now able, with the Landsat archive, to actually look at the Chesapeake Bay, every couple of years, or even every year. And that's where we're moving towards, to be more effective in monitoring what's going on, not doing maps every 5 years, but doing it on an annual basis. So an integrating monitoring system for the bay that uses remote sensing. And I think I'm going, oh wait, I'm going backwards now, sorry, folks. Sorry about that. And so researchers at the University of Maryland, they've actually used the data to actually see how, forest cover is changing on an annual basis. So this is the same, this is, I think, the road to Dulles. This is Dulles right here. So you can actually track when forests were harvested or changed, and when they regrow, they're harvested again, so on and so forth. So really get a dynamic of the change occurring. It's pretty amazing. This is another example more around BWI. So I don't know if any of you are familiar with this area. This is 95 right here, 295, or no, I think this is 295. So this area, so BWI Airport is up here. So this area here is Arundel Mills Mall. I don't know if any of you are familiar with that. And I think this area here is the Russet development. So anyway, I mean, basically it's like a fingerprint of the change and over time. So I think I'll. So looking more towards the future, I've talked a lot about Landsat, but we have a lot of different sensors as well. And one of the new things that is coming up is called LiDARs. And so it's an active laser that pulses through, from an aircraft or a satellite. And basically it gives an idea of the canopy height and the canopy density. So it can actually go through a forest. And so this here is a map from the ELVIS laser vegetation imaging sensor. It's an airborne system. And so this is an actual view of Patuxent Wildlife Refuge. And it basically gives you the height of the canopy. So the higher, so this is a really fascinating, new view of basically the land and the forest, in that you start getting an image of the canopy gaps, you start getting an image of the percent tree cover as and so they have used this to actually start studying, bird diversity, because certain bird species like, more open spaces, more closed forest, so on and so forth. So this is kind of the future. We're still a few years away from having anything like this in space, but this gives an example of the kind of data we're acquiring. So this is an example. Here you actually get a density of the forest as well. So you can see where different actual actual bird species actually, some of them exist in different heights of the canopy. So there's very interesting applications. This is more an example of using the, don't worry about reading the small text. I should have learned the lesson not to do that. But this is just an example of what I was talking about, nitrogen deposition from the OMI sensor. And so what you see is there's quite a bit of nitrogen oxide or nitrogen dioxide, from the major urban centers. And all of this is airborne, so it gets deposited, and apparently up to about a third of the nitrogen that goes into the bay comes from the air. So it's important to have an ability to measure what's going on in the atmosphere, irrespective of what's going on the land. So this is Ken Pickering and his group at NASA Goddard that are doing this. There's a lot of work as well at Goddard in terms of looking at chlorophyll and water turbidity. So we have sensors that can actually measure, sea surface temperature, turbidity, so on and so forth. And so this has impact in terms of being able to measure harmful algal blooms and things like that exist in the middle of the Chesapeake Bay. Just to mention that NASA Wallops is another center. It's on Chincoteague Island. It's not on the Chesapeake Bay watershed, but a lot of the instruments for NASA get tested on airplanes. So this is an example of this cloud absorption radiometer and how they might fly out of Wallops and do some tests over the Chesapeake Bay. So there's a lot of opportunities for new instruments, testing new instruments, new technologies, so on and so forth. And you can see the Great Dismal Swamp down here. So. Okay, and I think I'm gonna skip through ahead of this. And just to say a couple of words that in terms of the educational activities. What I've done in the past, I did some work with the national parks, and so we created a tree cover and an impervious cover map of Delaware Water Gap National Recreation Area. And so what we did is we brought kids from area schools to come into the field with us and help us verify the accuracy of our maps. So it's a really good opportunity to get citizen scientists, if you will, and to get kids interested in the science in a hands-on way, so that they see that, when you're learning math, this is where it gets used in the real world setting. So we've done a lot of training of teachers, so we had this big field validation campaign in September of '06, and we're planning for doing something like this with our 2010 maps in September, October timeframe. There's something called the Summer of Innovation that the NASA administrator wants to engage a lot more students in hands-on activities, and so we're planning on doing something for that. And as usual, so this is what we do. We go out in the forest, very simple tools, but rigorous. Okay. And so I had put a couple of the The you know, a lot of the girls showed up all made up with their handbags. All right, we're ready, going into the field. And so I think they were a little surprised. So that's a good experience anyway. It was a good learning experience for us as well. So next time they did have bug spray. So, and so this is essentially what they do is they walk, you know, this is a Landsat pixel, the little stippled area there. And so basically they just walk from one corner to the other like that, and then they make measurements at different steps. And so once they're done, they calculate, you know, what's the percent tree cover for that pixel, and that's the ground truth. I mean, that's what, so then, you know, right here, I know it's a little hard to read perhaps, but so this is the predicted tree cover from, you know, the algorithm that the satellite data, and then this is what the students have measured. Okay, so we essentially get the ground truth of our satellite data by involving students that way. So, so basically, in summary, I think that the first bullet I haven't really talked about too much, but we have. Oh, there it is. Keep losing. Okay. So we can estimate basically the results that we're getting from what the students give us is that we can estimate impervious cover and tree cover to about plus or minus 10%. Impervious cover more between 7%. That's our error. And it turns out that, you know, for ecological thresholds, if an ecosystem is 10% or more impervious, it's already impacted. So we already, you know, as the best that we can do from remote sensing, we're already almost at that level where, you know, our error eats up almost everything. So we're really challenged in terms of what we can actually do from remote sensing. And so it's important to recognize that, you know, remote sensing is just a tool. Okay, it has limitations, and so we're not going to solve all the problems ourselves, but again, you can do this over time, so you can actually do the monitoring in a large scale as well. So, and you know what I've talked about, that the data and tools, you know, there's excellent opportunities for science, but as well for hands-on science and citizen science. So if you have an interest in that, please, you know, let me know. It's all volunteer, by the way.
With free bug spray, right?
Free bug spray, yes. Thank you. Thank you. So, just in conclusion, so the free Landsat data and the Landsat archive that goes back 40-some years, it provides really unprecedented opportunities for new science and for basically more effective monitoring of the Bay. So I think when I look forward in my dreams, I can see us doing it every year, creating data sets that can be used on a yearly basis, that can inform resource managers and decision makers in the Chesapeake Bay. But we have to sort of evolve from thinking about, you know, little scenes one time to thinking about a watershed, to think about an integrating monitoring system that, you know, is more effective. But right now, I mean, we're still, in terms of the science, we're still, you know, learning quite a bit of things. There's no accepted complete algorithm that can do the end-to-end wall-to-wall monitoring. So we have some steps to do. So if there's any students out there, there's a lot of opportunities. And the last part is, well, whose job is it? So NASA, you know, we have the technology, we have, you know, we can be one of the partners, but it has to be somebody's job to use. So if we have yearly data, whose job is it to use that data in an effective manner? And that's, you know, I don't know whether the executive order will address that. I think it does in many ways, but it's something that we definitely need to think about. And so I think I'll end it here. I'm gonna show a little movie afterwards, but I'll be glad to entertain some questions while that movie's going. So thank you. So let me start this. And so this is actually a zoom out. We have a lot of zoom ins, and I thought, oh, that's cool, zoom out. So let's see. So this is now, from the Lincoln Memorial with ICONOS 1 meter data. And it actually turns out that the military has 1 meter data for a lot of the world, and that can be used for federal agencies. So there's also the potential of starting to use these data, over large regions. Does this thing go out? I guess. So, you can start seeing, and one of the things in this, there's a lot of different science, is you can actually see the shadows of objects and things, you can see shadows of trees. So the spatial scale means that we have to adjust our science as well in terms of, because at the Landsat scale you don't see shadows really unless it's a huge object. And you see, I thought I was in this building up here, and I'm glad somebody pointed it out that I was way wrong. And so now you zoom out to the Landsat scale, and then we're going to actually zoom out to something called MODIS. So this is more continental scale data. And then I'll let it run. But if anybody, does anybody have any questions? Fascinated? Okay, yes?
Are your impervious area data good enough for local flood prediction?
Yes. Yeah.
Do they
Yeah.
use them for that?
Mm-hmm.
Are they used?
Yeah. I mean, the data that we have from Landsat typically underestimate the amount of impervious cover. So if you want to do a really, really good job and you have a smaller region, you can actually start using the ICONOS or the commercial satellite data, but typically that costs a lot of money. So there's kind of a trade-off as to how large an area you want to do. And so this is the city lights. We actually have a satellite making measurements at night. And so, anybody else? A question? Yes?
Has the winter crop program been in place long enough to show any record that it's having a positive impact on nutrients on the bay?
I think it's only been around for a couple years. I'm not entirely sure, but I mean, what we're trying to do is to actually see if we can. I mean, once we develop this winter cover crop map, it would be nice to link. So if you can map a watershed, you can compare the amount of winter cover crops with the water quality data to see if you can build any relationships there. I mean, there's other issues with it that, in a sense, if the previous year maybe you had a drought and your crop didn't really fully grow, then it might have not used a lot of the nutrients that were put in there in the first place. So there's issues as well of trying to be able to keep track of what happened the previous year and the previous year to sort of see how effective it is. But that's what we're working towards. Yeah, I don't think the state has any statistics that I've seen so far. Yes.
Why would a reduced water flow in the Susquehanna improve the quality of water in the bay?
Well, it's very interesting because actually, I mean, it's the biggest. I should stand here. Sorry, It's the biggest watershed that flows into the bay, and so it's the biggest contributor of nutrients. Anything, the croplands in Pennsylvania are typically the ones that contribute the most, and so when there's less water flowing from there, usually things improve. And one of the things that's a little strange is that right at the mouth of the Susquehanna, there's certain areas getting better while others are not. So the story is not entirely complete there, and so maybe the atmospheric deposition is playing a role as well. I don't know, did I answer your question? Yeah. So basically, the higher the flow of the Susquehanna, typically the more nutrients you'll get, because it's the largest watershed. Dana, you had.
I was wondering about the users of the Chesapeake Bay specific data
Mm-hmm.
and how they may be changing from the main users of the past to who you see as the users that may be there for the future.
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, ideally, I mean, you know, that goes to the question of whose job is it. But, I mean, the way that NASA builds applications is, you know, we develop a lot of the technology, the data tools in partnership with another agency. And then, but then it's, you know, as the technology matures, then the other agency is able to use the tools or the data more effectively. But in terms of the Chesapeake, and you know, I had some experience with the Park Service as well, is, you know, the resource management agencies don't have necessarily the expertise or capability to actually do that processing. So we're sort of at there almost needs to be some place in the middle where, you know, NASA provides the data, it gets processed to a certain level, and then that's where the users would come in. And so, you know, I don't know if it means the creation of a new entity. Lord knows, I don't think we need more entities in the Chesapeake Bay program, but we have to identify who is, I mean, maybe it's the USGS is the centralized group that would do that. I don't know if that answers your question, but it's a complicated question. Yeah. Oh, you can't ask questions, sorry. No, I'm
Well, I was
kidding.
looking through your newsletter. I think it's the division newsletter. It was talking about monitoring the oil spill. I know that's not Chesapeake
Oh, okay,
Bay, but
yeah.
I was curious if NASA's going to continue to monitor the changes in the wetlands and all that. It looked like they were playing a fairly significant role in tracking the oil
Yeah.
from space.
Yeah, I think there's been a big effort to map those. I mean, there was a big effort after Katrina to look at those changes. But there's, and you know, the LiDAR stuff, the LiDAR data as well are very important because you can actually look at mortality of trees and areas. But I think there's been a big effort to map the coastline before all the junk comes, you know, so that you have at least a before look at the surface, and then you can compare, you can compare the after. But typically, I mean, it's a difficult problem because in terms of remote sensing, there's not that much we can do. I mean, you can sort of, when the sun shines on the oil slick at a certain angle, you can sort of measure it. But there's really not that much we can do in terms of, you know, stopping it or I mean, we can sort of measure it, but you know, again, there's stuff under the surface as well. So. Yeah, I think we're going to be monitoring. I'm afraid we're going to be monitoring that area for quite some years to come. And yeah, it's something I thought about. It was a little, almost anticlimactic to speak about the Chesapeake Bay when that's going on. But anyway.
Okay, is that everything?
No.
Oh, one more question?
You're just talking about other agencies cooperating.
Mm-hmm.
I noticed on one of the slides there was a Homeland Security icon, and I just wondered what kind of role would they play.
In the Chesapeake Bay? Do you work for Homeland Security or?
I work in the library.
Good question. I don't know. I mean, I know that like I was surprised to see there was DoD, and I think they have facilities, so they're concerned about what's going on with any kind of climate change related to their facilities. I'm not quite sure Homeland Security what their role is.
I know what it was when Dick Cheney was vice president.
Oh, he had. They still have, yeah.
Yeah, maybe they were monitoring. They had boats there when
Yeah.
was there. They were protecting the shoreline.
No, it's funny. I had we took a trip to the bay, and there was Donald Rumsfeld and his wife driving by with a caravan of guys behind them. But
Of course.
yeah, so I think they still have those houses, but yeah. So.
Well, I guess at this point we should
Oh.
thank Dr. Brown de Colstoun.
Thank you very much, and.
Thank you so much.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.